Have you heard the buzz around Buzz and the boys? John Rothstein has Texas A&M as the number 4 team in the SEC. Gary Parrish has Texas A&M as the number 11 team in the country. John Fanta has Texas A&M as the number 18 team in the country.
The Aggies are returning Wade Taylor for another campaign in the SEC this year, but their biggest challenge this offseason was replacing the 20% of offensive production that was lost by one player in Boots Radford this offseason.
Boots was a star on the Aggies the last few years, but they added some dudes and returned the core of this team. Let's talk about the buzz around the Texas A&M Aggies today on the Hoops Southbound Show. I'm never going to not use that pun. It's never not going to happen. Maddy, you know what I find interesting about this week? We're talking about two teams that you and I feel very differently on for very different reasons. So I'm really looking forward to the different perspectives that are going to be in this conversation this week when we talk about these teams. But let's get started with what happened last year with Texas A&M.
So last season, Texas A&M was picked regularly in the top four in the SEC and was even picked to be a possible Final Four team by media members like Matt Norlander. But things didn't really shake out that way during the season. The Aggies were 21-15. They were tied for seventh in the SEC and ended up the number 35 team in KenPom. After the regular season, the Aggies did make the semifinals to the SEC tournament, but lost to Houston in an overtime thriller in the round of 32. So close to making that Sweet 16 mark.
And speaking of that Sweet 16, the one of the biggest storylines this season for the Aggies, we've seen linear progression for Texas A&M under Buzz Williams. They got a little bit closer to getting that bigger and bigger step to getting there. Can they get to the Sweet 16? Will this be more of the same this year? That next step is the Sweet 16. The Aggies haven't been there since 2018. I think the way they get there is through a guy like Wade Taylor, and you're going to have to come around and you're going to have to build around this guy and take pressure off him so he can go wild, put up points, and distribute the basketball and excel. The other big storyline, it's the return of one of the biggest rivalries in the sport, Texas A&M and Texas. Wade Taylor, Hayden Hefner, Lee, Manny Obaseki, Zurich Phelps, all kids from the great state. You think those guys were recruited by Texas? You think they grew up watching the Longhorns get all the love there? It's going to be bumping in the Lone Star State on January 4th when this rivalry gets going again. I'm ready for the party. Might try to convince my brothers to go down south to Aggie Land and let them get booed in their burnt orange shirts just a little bit. It's going to be a ton of fun.
Yeah, this is a rivalry that I cannot wait to get into because it's going to be a bloodbath amongst these fans, and we will for sure get to watch some intense basketball. So, as fans of good basketball and the train wreck that tends to be rival fans, we're excited to pop some popcorn and watch the madness ensue.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's what it's all about. There is the madness and the craziness and the passion, and the student section's going absolutely wild. We've seen some great ones over the year. I'm glad this one's back because we've only gotten like this game twice on neutral courts since Texas A&M left the Big 12 years ago. So it's great for this to be coming back.
For sure. So before we get to that rivalry game, let's turn to some of the players to know. David, you mentioned Wade Taylor. If anybody's been a continued watcher of the podcast, I wouldn't shut up about Wade Taylor.
I mean, it's
So
Wade Taylor. How can you not? He's a great basketball player.
he is phenomenal. Talking about phenomenal, he's got 19.1 points per game, 3.4 rebounds, and 4 assists per game, and shooting at 36.6% from the field. He is one of my favorite players to watch again and again. The man should be cast in a Holes remake because he's the guy that always seems to dig this team out. Whether it's a wild 3-point shot, driving to the rim, or just being an outstanding playmaker, he always seems to get it done in the clutch.
You know, last year everybody was kind of picking Wade Taylor to be SEC Player of the Year. It ended up being Dalton Connect, but Wade Taylor was not shying away from being an outstanding performer again. And I expect the same here in another return campaign with the Aggies this season. He's just a player that can get the job done for them. So what the real task is going to be is not so much, hey, is Wade Taylor going to set the world on fire for the Aggies and carry this team. It's really about how you build around him. And the biggest issue is the fact you lost Boots Radford. Losing Tyrese Radford, you lost 16.5 points per game and 6.5 rebounds a night and 2.6 assists. And he was a big chunk of that production, as we mentioned. Aggies lost 23.1% of their offensive scoring production. And then overall, Boots made up for about 20% of that. So Radford was a big loss. So how do you replace that? Well, one of the guys that Texas A&M got was Zurich Phelps. Now, Zurich Phelps comes from SMU, and he put up a lot of points, 14.8 points per game. He also does a decent job of rebounding at 4.1 rebounds and gets around three assists a game. Where you're really hurting with this kid and you really want it to get better is the fact that he only shot 21.6 from three last season. So that's an area that's got to improve if you're going to take the pressure off of Wade Taylor. But he was a high usage rate guy for SMU last season, really a key piece for that team. The poor 3-point shooting, like I said, it's got to improve. Otherwise, CJ Wilcher may be the more important pickup out of Nebraska. But Texas A&M was the second worst 3-point shooting team in the SEC last year. This is a key area of improvement if they want to go deeper in March. You can't be just a one-dimensional offense. More on that shooting though here in a little bit, but I do like Zurich Phelps, and I think that he is a player that could put up a lot of points for you and there in Texas.
Yeah, I think he's definitely going to be a key player to watch this season. I think with Phelps, we're going to see his game rise up to the level of this new competition. So he's got some talent around him. I think we see that kind of help him step up and be that filler piece that Texas A&M needs after losing Boo Radford.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's got to happen. It's got to happen. That's the big takeaway.
Yeah. And then moving on to Henry Coleman, one of the big men that's going to be a big key piece for this team. 8.8 points per game, 5.6 rebounds per game, and shooting 57.3% from the field. While we talked about Taylor being the go-to guy with ice in his veins, Coleman gives us the grit and determination of the front court. He's a tough player who plays with a lot of physicality, which is something that they're going to need because this is a team that's built around getting a rebound and getting second chance points. There were several games last season we saw Coleman grab either the highest points or highest rebounds in games, and I don't see that changing any this year.
Yeah, he's going to have to be that big guy, and he's got some help now, though, too. So as long as he's still the leader in this front court for the Aggies, I think that's going to be the key thing for the success of the front court for the Aggies this season. And Henry Coleman's a big piece of that, and he's a guy that you just love having there in your
Mhm.
front court because he's such a dominant player when he gets things going. And on the offensive rebound production side of things, those second chance points, he's a big piece of why you're getting success down there. So let's turn to the roster. Weird thing about the Texas A&M roster. Upon time of research and producing this week's show, Texas A&M has not released their official roster yet. They might be the last team to do that. Don't know what's taking so long because they're basically returning last year's team. So going off what we know, Maddie, what are your thoughts on this roster?
While we definitely didn't see as much turnover as some of the other SEC teams that we've been talking about, A&M did have some production that's going to need to be made up. We've already talked about how much of a hole was left when Radford left and how that needed to be filled. But I think when you look at the transfers and the depth of their roster from last season, we should see a similar amount of talent on this team. You mentioned Zurich Phelps, but we also have Pharrell Payne, who led Minnesota in block shots, and CJ Wilcher, who added 39.4% from three at Nebraska. So I think they've added some very good pieces to help kind of fill in the qualities they were missing from last year, but also fill some of the shoes that Radford left behind.
Yeah, and there's guys that I want to see step up as well coming into this next year's campaign. Like you got a lot of guys who averaged around 6 to 7 points last season. I want to see someone step up just a little bit more and be a little bit more offensively consistent or a little bit more offensively dominant on this team. Because to me, that's really the thing to take Texas A&M to that next step is improving that offense. And I'm looking at guys like Solomon Washington, who put up 7.4 points per game but only shot 28.3% from three. Jace Carter, he shot 24.6% from three, put up 6.9 points per game. Want to see if he can step up. Want to see if Manny Obaseki can be a little bit more of an offensive powerhouse. He put up 7 points a game and shot 40.4% from three last season. Really struggled at the free throw line. I mean, you're losing a couple of points there on your averages just by going 1 for 2 every time at the stripe. So he's another player that I want to see step up on this Texas A&M team.
Yeah, I think I really like that you mentioned both Obaseki and Washington because we saw glimpses last season of them having absolute phenomenal games and that they can be a powerhouse for this team. So I think it's just becoming consistent to help, raise them up to the next level. And I think if those players continue to do that, to continue to work on their game and be consistent, we may see them in the Sweet 16.
It's a possibility. I mean, it's definitely a possibility. You're looking for growth, you're looking for continuity, and that might be something that gets it done.
So we've already done our season preview on a couple of teams, and Texas A&M is looking a lot like one of these teams, Auburn in particular. They're returning a lot of talent and key pieces from last year's team, and they're experienced.
Very
They,
experienced team.
they have the least amount of offensive production loss in the SEC this season, only 23.1%. And we keep mentioning Boots Radford. He made up 20%. So you're only losing 3% outside of one player. We got the Aggies returning 8 players, the most returners in the SEC, and 7 of the 8 returners are all upperclassmen.
I mean, it's a ridiculous turnover. You don't get teams like this very often where it's like, oh wow, they're returning everything, and that's what I think one of the biggest strengths are going to be for Texas A&M. Not just from a what the product's going to be standpoint, but also just team chemistry, knowing what's going on from a X's and O standpoint, from the game plan that Buzz is putting out. You also know how to deal with Coach Williams. You know how he can get the most out of you and how you fit into his game plan. So I think there can be growth out of this continuity here. So I look forward to what Texas A&M is going to be able to accomplish growth-wise from this kind of roster consistency. And that retention is going to play a key piece of the conversation when it comes to the roster construction and expectations. So let's go ahead and hit those indexes. Again, if you don't know what's going on, we're looking at 2 areas to help give us a picture of who Texas A&M is going to be this season and try to get a feel for this team. The first one is roster construction. It's based on Evan Mia's roster construction research that took place this offseason. There are 3 big items that outline a well-constructed roster according to this research. First is talent. Pretty important thing to have. Texas A&M has been kind of middle of the pack the last few seasons. Recruiting classes are in the top 40 the last few years, and their last transfer class wasn't large, but still was inside the top 75 in the country. Texas A&M is middle of the pack when it comes to the talent they've brought in. It's a simple case is that it's not bad, it's just where they're at. But talent isn't the full equation, and those next 2 items is where Texas A&M excels. Playing time retention is another key component. Even in the transfer portal area, this still matters. Guys who've played together, Aggies did this really well here. Texas A&M is returning 162.3 minutes per game between 8 players. That's 20.3 minutes per player. So you're returning key players who have seen the floor for Texas A&M. This might be their best. This might be the best we've seen so far in the SEC. I'd have to double check that, but I know it's up there. That's definitely one of the best returns. And finally, you got the return of experienced player who have played in the system before. Returners who have played 1 or more seasons with this team. Again, really good retention, as we mentioned. 8 players back for Texas A&M. Wade Taylor, Henry Coleman, Solomon Washington, Manny Obaseki, Jace Carter, Anderson Garcia, Hayden Hefner, and Rob Dockery. I think Texas A&M put together a good roster, but they're going to have to play above their talent level. So you really got about 2.5 out of 3 boxes checked here. The talent level, like I said, is what's kind of holding them back. The Champions Index is what we use, though, to look at the expectations when it comes closer to March. It's incomplete right now because there's more we add to this as the season goes on, but there are elements that these are the elements Vegas uses to find their best bets during the March Madness tournaments. First, you want upperclassmen being your leading scorers. 2 of your top 3 should be upperclassmen. Aggies got this one and is one of the areas that they should be good at regardless. A lot of upperclassmen on this team. If stats hold from last year, your leaders you're looking at are Wade Taylor, Zurich Phelps, and Farrell Payne. Those would be your leaders. They're all upperclassmen, 2 seniors and a junior. Second, you want to be able to shoot 36% from 3. As I mentioned, Texas A&M was the second worst three-point shooting team in the SEC last year. They shot 28.4% from three. If you total it up with the transfers for the guys who have played a year or more of college basketball, this roster currently shoots 30.2% from three from last season. That's not good, and that's why I'm saying I was saying earlier, everyone on this team but Obaseki, Wilcher, and Anderson Garcia have to shoot better. They just have to. They're on pace right there be at the bottom of the SEC again when it comes to shooting. We might see some improvement because they got another year of experience under their belts, but overall, this is the area that's not a great sign. It's one of the worst ones we've seen so far. And then finally, you want to be a top 40 defense in KenPom. Aggies returned a lot of guys from last year's team. We should see some consistency here. However, Texas A&M was 68th in KenPom last season. You got to figure out how to take that next step forward. You got Phelps, who put up a sub 100 rating in defensive rating on SMU last year. Great ad. That was the best rating on SMU. Farrell Payne was had the second best defensive rating on Minnesota. Meanwhile, CJ Welcher had one of the worst defensive ratings on Nebraska last year. That said, Nebraska was a decent defensive team in the Big Ten last year. Fourth best defensive rating in the Big Ten and 43rd on KenPom. So he's the worst on a really good defending team. We'll see how it comes up for him and what we can expect. Defense could improve, but I think we're going to see that. I've got some optimism here in this area based on the transfers and the consistency on this roster. So it's like 1.5 boxes out of 3 checked here. Not the best on expectations, in my opinion, but it could be good enough to make a Sweet 16 in the right bracket. And that's kind of the goal. But Maddy, we have disagreements. So this is kind of what the numbers say. I think you're a little bit bigger on the eye test. How do you feel about Texas A&M?
I feel really good about Texas A&M. Their backcourt is still one of the top tier in college basketball. We've got a solid front court in Coleman and Garcia, as you mentioned, both returners, both upperclassmen. So I think that's going to add a lot to that front court. But my biggest question for this team is their depth. Unfortunately, even if you have some unstoppable forces in your starting lineup, there could be some holes when they sit. And unless these guys are just the Avengers, they're going to need a breather. So
I mean, fair enough.
So, I mean, if you can keep your main guys and you can keep somebody on the side with some fresh legs that can do a somewhat decent job, I think Texas A&M is going to have a solid core, and I think we're going to see a lot out of them, and I think they are going to surprise some people. Okay, yeah. Speaking of the schedule, we play games for a reason. Good teams aren't just all of the stats and analytics. So let's talk about some games. Texas A&M is starting out in one of the few power conferences versus SEC matchups on opening night. The Aggies will start the year off with UCF out of the Big 12.
Yeah, so UCF is projected somewhere toward the bottom of the Big 12 for this coming season. They returned 4 players. Both were last year's, dynamic players in the backcourt. Out of a couple of them, Jalen Sellers had 16 points a game and 4 rebounds. He led the team in scoring last season. And then you got some guys like Darius Johnson, who's the other half of the backcourt, their point guard. He was a leader on the offense last year. But overall, this is just not a great UCF team and one that I would put just a whole lot of stock in. I think this should be a win for the Aggies. They've handled the departures well there at UCF, but they haven't just been super successful. They do have Jordan Ivy Curry coming in and a few other guys as well, but we'll see how things play out for UCF. But I would expect a win from Texas A&M.
Always good to start off the year with a win, so we'll keep our fingers crossed there. The Aggies will then go on to face Texas A&M, Commerce, Lamar, and then Ohio State.
Yeah, Ohio State's becoming this team, and while I'm putting my schedule, I didn't realize it when I'm doing all these graphics. They're turning into this year's Memphis. Memphis last year seemed to just play everybody. They seem to be on everybody's schedule. Here's Ohio State just kind of doing exactly what Memphis was like last year. So we really don't know what Ohio State's going to be. They've got a new coaching situation there in Columbus. There's been changes. But there are players that you're probably going to be familiar with on this Ohio State team. Aaron Bradshaw from Kentucky, who put up 4.9 points per game and 3.3 rebounds. He was a 5-star freshman coming in last season. Big time player. You're going to probably be familiar with him just if you follow SEC basketball. The Michi Johnson from South Carolina was a big piece on South Carolina. He transfers into Ohio State with 14.1 points per game and 4.1 rebounds, and also roughly 3 assists a game. Then you're also going to have another guy from a power conference coming in Sean Stewart, who put up 2.6 points per game for Duke last season and 3.2 rebounds. So again, we really don't know what to expect, but some of the returners that we're looking at are Bruce Thornton, Devin Royal, and Evan McHaffey coming back for Ohio State. So maybe some consistency, maybe some improvement, but that's kind of the national consensus right now when everybody's talking about Ohio State. We don't know. And that's what's crazy with Ohio State. No one's got a really clear answer on it, on who Ohio State's going to be next year.
Texas A&M will then turn around to face Southern on November 20th, and then it's off to Las Vegas to play in the brand new Players Era Festival.
Players era is, so we've talked about a lot of it there in our off season and some of the things that are surrounding the Players Era Festival and the money payout. But like the big thing that everyone is talking about when it comes to Players Era Festival, $1 million for playing in this thing, additional $1 million to the winner of the MTE. We're going to have to see how that goes. There's NCAA issues. There's also just the history of MTEs and how much they actually make. And there's all sorts of concerns here. But let's talk about the basketball side of things. You get Oregon, Creighton, and San Diego State. Those are all great names. All three of those teams were in the NCAA tournament last year. So Texas A&M is facing some quality opportunities. Obviously, you got Dana Altman there in Oregon. Creighton's returning a couple of key players as well for them, and Kalkbrenner. And then San Diego State has been one of the better teams in college basketball under Brian Dutcher and has a shot again to win the Mountain West Conference again this year. So you got an opportunity here to really pick up some quality wins to go toward that NCAA tournament resume out there in Las Vegas. So I like this opportunity a lot for the Aggies.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a great way to, kind of see what the Aggies are made of this season. Like you mentioned, 3 great teams that are usually always in the conversation for being contenders in the season. So I think it'll be a good kind of start to the year before they get going in SEC play. So after Vegas, Texas A&M will come back home to face some quality opponents. They'll face Wake Forest first in the ACC SEC Challenge.
Just another great game that Texas A&M has an opportunity here with Wake Forest. They're looking to bounce back after a bad season last year, or not really a bad season, but like one where they missed the tournament. They're looking to make the tournament for the first time since 2017. And they've got a couple of players on this team that need to be looked out for because they're really making a push for this thing. 2 of Wake Forest's 4 double-digit scorers are back, Hunter Silas and Cameron Wildreth.
Coast-to-coast challenge, Texas A&M will face Texas Tech in Fort Worth.
Yeah, the returners here, Chase McMillan, Darren Williams, Jack Francis, just a lot of guys. They have 6 returners coming back to this Texas A&M or Texas Tech team. So a lot like Texas Tech, a lot of key pieces coming back. They also added in some big time transfers. You're talking to guys like JT Toppin, who's transferred out of New Mexico and committed to Texas Tech. I told you guys during the portal content that he was going to a Texas school. He chose Texas Tech is where he ended up going. He was the Mountain West Freshman of the Year and had 12.4 points per game, 9.1 rebounds, and almost 2 blocks a night. Very, very good forward. And then Leon Horner was a freshman guard from Dallas, Texas. He was also a McDonald's All-American nominee. And then Elijah Hawkins is another player that's senior guard out of Minnesota, who's going to be coming on to this Texas Tech team. This is going to be tough. This is going to be a tough game. Texas Tech is looking to make a run in the Big 12 this year.
Yep. One more game in the non-conference. Texas A&M will play in the Indy Classic against Purdue.
Yeah, so this is their last Power 5 matchup here. The big thing here is there's no Zach Edey for Matt Painter and Purdue this coming season, but they still are projected to be one of the best teams in the Big Ten. And they still got guys like Fletcher Lawyer who are going to be big for this team. And Braden Smith is coming back again for this team at 12.6 rebounds and 8 assists a game. All sorts of guys that you're familiar with. And then the front court, they've also got Trey Kaufman-Reen, who's going to be coming in and try to replace, help replace Rudy Caleb First, all sorts of players. This backcourt's not empty yet. It's still there. They still got some guys. Purdue's going to be a challenge against Texas A&M, and they don't play a road game on this schedule. So this is the best they're going to get when they go to Indianapolis. It's technically a neutral site, but you're obviously in the same state that Purdue's from. So this one's going to be a challenge.
And then at Texas A&M, we'll close out the non-conference against Houston Christian and Abilene Christian. David, what are your thoughts on this non-conference schedule overall?
I think it's great. Honestly, I think it's great. This is going to be tough. I mean, you got so many opportunities for good wins on this thing that you are building yourself a serious chance to make a run into a good seed when it comes to Selection Sunday. So this is really good. This is what you want to see when you're building that resume in November and December before you even hit the conference play schedule on here. There's no true road test on here. That's kind of shocking. Texas Tech's in Fort Worth. So you're not even leaving your state, and you're actually going to what's about as neutral as you can get between College Station and Lubbock. And then you're also talking about Texas A&M going out to Indianapolis against Purdue. Obviously, you're in that state for Purdue, but still, you're not going to West Lafayette for that one. And so that one's a little bit still neutral site game for that. Ohio State, you get a College Station. UCF is really probably not going to help your resume that much. They're just not that exciting of a basketball team. But overall, you got chances in here to build that resume. And there's a couple of teams like Abilene Christian on this schedule who are just, they're going to be tough enough to deal with, because normally Abilene Christian and a few of these mid-majors on the schedule put together teams that have a chance to be there at March. So you got a chance to face yourself off against some of that March competition that gets overlooked and does actually help build your resume out of that quad 3 area about teams who have performed very, very well in the net. So we'll see how things shape up here. But I like this schedule. I wish they had a true road test. But other than that, this is a really, really good non-conference schedule. Let's go to the SEC schedule. At home, the Aggies get Alabama, Georgia, Arkansas, Tennessee, Vanderbilt, and Auburn. Away, they get Kentucky, Ole Miss, South Carolina, Missouri, Mississippi State, and Florida. And then their home and homes are Texas, Oklahoma, and LSU. Maddy, thoughts on the conference schedule?
I think somebody over at Texas A&M needs to go buy a bunch of lottery tickets, because they got the hardest fought teams in the SEC at home. How much better could it get for the Aggies? Thinking about Alabama, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Auburn all at home, getting
Yeah.
that home court advantage is going to be huge for those games. I mean, they've got some on their, away schedule, which Kentucky's still got some question marks. They have an absolute great team, but we don't know how it's going to mesh, especially with the first-year coach. Got Mississippi State, who's going to be pretty hard, and Ole Miss and Florida. But it's kind of one of those, we'll see where they land. And then home and home, you may drop one, but you've got Oklahoma and LSU, two teams that still have very big question marks next to them. So I think you're going to get a lot of points built up in this SEC schedule.
They get, in the first week, Texas at home, Oklahoma, Alabama at home, and then their fourth game is on the road in Rupp against Kentucky. So if Kentucky hasn't gelled yet, I mean, man, they could start out 3-1, 4-0, like no problem in the SEC to start the schedule out. And they get Texas again early in this schedule. They got Ole Miss early in January. So a lot of these teams that they haven't fully come together, they got some really good opportunities in January to build this resume. And then February, their biggest game in February is going to be Arkansas and Tennessee. Those, probably they're going to be the biggest ones they have, and both those are at home. And then you've got Auburn, who's going to be right after that Florida game. So if you go 1-1 between there, I mean, you got so many good wins here as the opportunity for so many good wins on this SEC schedule. Things work out really, really well for the Aggies here. I think the SEC schedule is really good to them. So all right, here we go. This is one of those teams that me and you had a huge disagreement on, Maddy, back at Decision Day. Let's see where we are now. Maddy, what are your expectations for Texas A&M?
So David, we've talked about it quite a bit, and I really don't know where I've been putting my position so far this year. So I think I'm going to end up in one of those like blind ranking situations where I run out of space and I'm going to have to put a team that I
I know
really,
where
really
you've ranked everybody. I keep track of
somewhere
it.
I really don't want to. I mean, I know where I rank them, but I think it's going to come down to the fact when we get to the last couple of teams, I'm going to be like, well, crap, I wanted them higher up. But Texas A&M, I'm kind of in that spot where I think I may have put them somewhere else, but I'm going to put them at number 7.
Okay.
My expectations for them have dropped down a little bit based on what we're seeing in the rest of the conference, but I think they're a solid team that have a huge opportunity ahead of them. I think we see them probably sitting at 21 wins is my prediction. So 21 and 10, and I think that that's a great space to be in, especially if you're trying to make that run back to the Sweet 16 and get to the best point you've been at since 2018.
Okay, so I agree with you. The great opportunities are on here for Texas A&M and the schedule. Like I said, you got a good conference schedule, and you've also got a bunch of good opportunities for quad one wins there in the non-conference. So I really like that for Texas A&M. This is not a stats-based team. They got a good coach who uses talent, and I think he just uses what he has and makes things work. Is really the best job that Buzz can do. I think this is the number for this team should be somewhere around 19.5. I've got them 20 and 11 is where I'm at, and I've got them as my number 10 team in the SEC. I'm building my rankings based off competence, but to ask who do I think they are better than, are they better than Alabama? Are they better than Auburn? Are they better than Tennessee? Are they better than Arkansas? Are they better than Florida? Are they better than Ole Miss? So I've kind of got a group rankings mentality going on. Should definitely be an NCAA tournament team. And I've got them in my chaotic 7 through 10 group. A lot of these teams might end up tied somewhere in the SEC, but none of them feel like bubble teams. They all should be in the NCAA tournament, is really my feelings on this group. So that's where I've got them at, and that's really in that group of chaos right there is where I've got Texas A&M at in that group with those teams put together. And I think the only one I've revealed so far in that group is Texas is the only other one I've got in that group so far. But yeah, I just expect a lot of chaos to that 7 through 10 range there. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching the Hoop Southbound show. We greatly appreciate it. How do you guys think Texas A&M is going to do this season? Where do you see them at for this year? Let us know in the comment section. If you have not already, please drop us a like and subscribe to the Hoop Southbound show. We greatly appreciate it. We appreciate you guys being here, hanging out with us, and talking basketball. We're really fortunate to have you guys as an audience, and we appreciate each and every one of you guys coming by and checking out the things that we're talking about this week. So until next time, we'll catch you in the next one where we've got another team that me and Maddie agree on, and that's going to be the Missouri Tigers. For you Texas A&M fans, be sure to check out our episode of The Portal where we talk about the portal class for the Aggies. Until next time, see you soon.
Thanks, guys. Have a great week.